Alright, so I'm going to start this review off by just apologizing for not having any new reviews in the last little while. Life kind of hit me hard this last month, and just making videos hasn't been my top priority. So, sorry for that. As such, I know I'm a little bit late to the punch with this review. It's been about a month since this album came out, but I still wanted to talk about it because it's kind of one of the more anticipated releases that I'd been talking about this year. And so here it is, Jordan Rudess's Wired for Madness. So for those who don't know, Jordan Rudess is also a pretty accomplished solo artist. He's released quite a few solo albums to his name, probably the second most out of any Dream Theater member, this side of Mike Portnoy, of course. And with Mike Portnoy having not been in the band for the past 10 years, I'd say Jordan Rudess is probably the one with the most solo albums to his name recently. And it seems that this one's probably gotten the most promotion out of any of his solo albums that he's ever released, with the advent of social media really kind of helping bolster this album's appearance. Now, one would probably expect Wired for Madness to sound very similar to his regular work with Dream Theater, and you would be forgiven for thinking that's the case, but listening to Wired for Madness, you can tell that this is not necessarily the same beast. It seems that Jordan's taken a little bit more of a classic prog approach, something very similar to works by artists like Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Yes, and kind of put his own Jordan Rudess-y twist on them. One of the aspects that I was really looking forward to about this album as a guitar player is the fact that Jordan Rudess is also playing guitar on this record, as well as doing the majority of the vocal work himself, making this probably a bit more of a true solo album than some of the other Dream Theater members, like James LaBrie's solo albums, which are really kind of more of his backing band solo albums with his own sort of lyrics and vocal approach taken. That said, Jordan Rudess still enlists the help of some really heavy-hitting names, especially on guitar, where you have Guthrie Govan, Joe Bonamassa, and of course his bandmate John Petrucci, and Vinnie Moore, appearing in some form or another on the songs. He also works with drummers Marco Miniman on one track. I will correct that from a lot of the reviews I'm seeing where they say he plays all over the record. He's only on one track, while regular Jordan Rudess drummer Rod Morgenstein appears on pretty much the rest of the album, save for two tracks that are played by a fellow named Elijah Wood. No, not that Elijah Wood. The bass is handled by a fellow named Alec Darson, except for the track Perpetual Shine, which is played by Jonas Reingold, and that about covers it for guest appearances. James LaBrie appears on vocals on one track, as well as someone by the name of Mariana Semkina, while the rest of the production is pretty much handled by Jordan Rudess himself. So let's talk about the songs on this. This album is kind of structured similarly to an Emerson, Lake and Palmer record, where you've got this massive epic number followed by 5 or 6 shorter individual songs that don't have anything to do with the big epic suite. The title track is the big epic suite, and it's broken into 2 parts, each one then further broken down into I think something like 10 distinct parts between both tracks. And it is a bit of a slog. I found myself kind of drifting in and out of attention during parts of the title track. Part 1 fares a little bit better than Part 2, where you only really have the 3 sections, Bring It On, Out of Body, and Lost Control. And the first 2 sections of it are purely instrumental, and they kind of show a little bit of every side of Jordan Rudess's keyboard playing, from sort of electronic blips to full-on rock and roll, synthesizer leads to, creative sort of organ patches. And then in the third movement, Lost Control, he does more of an organic sort of piano ballad style and starts to sing. I think a lot of people who maybe haven't heard Jordan Rudess sing before are going to be a little bit surprised by this. There isn't really a lot of precedent. He doesn't do any vocal work for Dream Theater, and vocal appearances on his solo albums are kind of few and far between. I do suspect there's a lot of pitch correction on his vocal work because some of it sounds a little weird, but I think that he did do a really good job and it sounds like Jordan Rudess. But it's the melodies in that section, Lost Control, that to me are the most gripping part of that track. And I think that that section, Lost Control, which itself was released as a single in the lead up to Wired for Madness's release, is probably the album's best moment for sort of getting you hooked on the sort of concept of it. And it's definitely the most sort of song-oriented material on this first side. Wired for Madness Part 2, on the other hand, it kind of drifts in and out of attention for me. I find myself kind of waiting for each idea to progress, and it's just idea after idea after idea. It seems like there wasn't really a lot of vetting ideas and kind of cutting them down to make something a little bit more concise and a little bit more easy to follow. Instead, it just kind of seems like Jordan Rudess was like, well, here's one part, and I'm going to follow it with this part, and I'm going to follow it with this part, and then this part comes in, and it's all good, nothing's getting cut, it's all going on the record. It's just a question of throwing ideas at the wall, and everything sticks. This is a bit of a good thing and a bad thing because we do see a lot of ideas, and there isn't a lot of repetition, but there's just so many ideas floating around that after a while you find your attention kind of wandering a little bit. So by the last movement of Wired for Madness, you're kind of like, well, that was a ride. Thankfully, the last 6 tracks on this record kind of go in a bit of a different direction where they're all very short, concise tracks that are a little bit more oriented to the song. Some of them, like Perpetual Shine and Just for Today, are sort of like distilled versions of the instrumental work of the title track. They're just very good, like rockin' instrumental numbers that, do what the title track does, but do it in a shorter, more easy to digest way, and I wish there was a little bit more of that going on in the first part. But then there are a couple of curveballs, like Just Can't Win, which is this sort of Emerson, Lake and Palmer-esque blues number that features Joe Bonamassa on guitar, and I mean, musically, it's alright. I can't get into the lyrical themes. I can't really get into it. I'm not really a big blues rock guy myself, so the track kind of falls a little flat on me, although I could see why some people might look at this track as a big highlight for this record. But possibly my favorite song from this album, hands down, is the final track, Why I Dream, which is the 6-minute sort of jazz rock number that goes through all these different time signatures, all the various moods that were on the record before, but presents it as an actual song with vocals and really captivating melodies, better lyrics than Just Can't Win, which is more of a, this is why I do what I do kind of lyric, and I really appreciate that from Jordan. It's a very great track. I just really love the sort of propulsive motion of the drum work in it, and the keyboard work is fantastic, as always. So my overall impression of Wired for Madness, it has some really good moments on it, and in some ways, some of these moments are actually better than what Jordan Rudess was bringing to the table in the context of Dream Theater's most recent album. There are moments on this album that I actually like better than Distance Over Time. But then there are a lot of moments, particularly within those first handful of tracks that make up the title Epic Suite, that just kind of feel like there's a little bit too much going on. It just kind of goes and doesn't really stop to let you sort of breathe and take it all in. Except for that one section, Lost Control, which I think is probably the best part of that entire suite, and hands down, Just one of the most beautiful moments on this record entirely. But you kind of have to get through a bit of a slog to get to it, and I think that does kind of weaken this album a little bit. But as far as how this album fares against other sort of symphonic prog releases this year, well, we haven't really seen too many sort of old school progressive rock albums come out, so, this one, we'll have to wait and see how it compares. Anyway, thank you for watching. I've been Travis. Love show out. Stop your dreaming.